welcome everybody. My name is Maaike Pols. I am Joe's scientific advisor. Thank you so much for joining us here today for the second session of our Researcher Innovation webinar series, in which you will hear from the 2021 Jove Science Education and Research Innovation Award winners, as they discuss their innovative solutions to advancing scientific research and education. In this session, Adapting International Research Conferences to Virtual Web-Based Systems, 2021 Jove Research Innovation Award winner Eric Hamlett will share insights into the development of a web-based system and social mechanism for enticing virtual event attendees and participants. Before we proceed, I'd like to get a few housekeeping items out of the way. Can everyone please use their raise hand icon on their toolbox to let me know if you can hear me all right? All right, excellent. Thank you very much. If you would like to ask our speaker any questions, please submit them in the Q&A section of your toolbox. We will answer as many questions as we have time for during the Q&A portion at the end of our session. You will get a recording of this webinar in your email in the next 24 hours. And lastly, at the conclusion of the session, there will be a brief 5-question survey. We would really appreciate you providing your feedback so that we can continue to improve our webinars. And without further ado, I would like to introduce my co-panelist, Eric Hamlett, Assistant Professor and T21RS Communications Associate at the Medical University of South Carolina in the United States. Thank you so much for joining us, Eric, and we're looking forward to your presentation.
Thank you, Maaike. May I share my screen now?
Absolutely.
All right, give me just a moment. I'd like to ask, can you see my presentation well, Maaike?
Yes, we sure can. Thank you.
Okay, fantastic. Well, thank you, Joe, for having me today and for the number of individuals that have joined this webinar series with me. I'm so happy to be able to share it. My name is Eric Hamlett, and I am Assistant Professor at the Medical University of South Carolina. Like many of you in the room, I do a lot of different tasks, and virtual conferencing is not one of them. I'm actually studying Down syndrome and Alzheimer's disease. Down syndrome occurs when we have, from having trisomy 21, which means you have a triplication of the 21st chromosome. That's 3 copies. If you have too many T21 cells, this leads to what we call Down syndrome, which is the most common genetic cause of intellectual disability in humans. Fortunately, Down syndrome life expectancy has tripled since the 1970s due to medical interventions, but there are still many risks associated with having Down syndrome and the developmental cardiac defects, childhood leukemia, epileptic seizures. And my specific research study, this population of individuals has the earliest incidence of Alzheimer's disease, often occurring in their 50s. So I'm a researcher focused on Down syndrome, and I've also been involved with the Trisomy 21 Research Society, which we just go by T21RS. This society was founded in 2014 when I was still in my infant training. Aren't we always training? But the mission of the T21RS is to connect researchers and T21 families, but also clinicians and individuals with Down syndrome. We want to promote research collaboration and build effective clinical communication to bridge science in the lab, the wet bench, to the clinical practice. We hold meetings every 2 years instead of annually. And so we've had 3 meetings preceding the COVID pandemic, but we had one meeting planned for 2021 in Long Beach that suddenly got canceled or it was disrupted. We have a lot of benefits to having a society that focuses on Down syndrome. We have more collaborative and coordinated research and a lot more support for our newest scientists, which is me actually. We've initiated new policy advocacy, and this has resulted in more NIH funding for individuals with Down syndrome and their comorbidities. In 2019, we were still a small society and still are. We have about 250 members. So if you're comparing your group or your society to our society, keep in mind, we are not a 15,000 member society. We're still relatively small. And that represents a large number of the societies that exist in the world. They tend to be various sizes, but there are a lot that are in the 300 to 600 range. So when the COVID-19 pandemic hit, this disrupted our usual in-person meeting quite suddenly. We had so much momentum built up, our membership was growing, and there were a lot of societal gains at stake. And we had to make this decision. Are we going to just cancel our event and not hold our usual meeting that brings everyone together for all these prosperous gains? Also, we had to think about how do our new students and staff and how do our new scientists meet their mentors, and this is a critical activity that comes from the meeting. And so we were pondering how to keep the momentum going. And what about just holding a virtual meeting? And so a virtual conference, how hard could that be? After all, webinars have been around for over 30 years now. And in fact, if you do a PubMed search with the medical history of virtual meetings, and this would be, search for virtual meeting, one of the very first virtual programs that were related to webinars occurred in 1996. And since then, there has been very slow but steady growth all the way up to 2019. And you can imagine with COVID-19, for many societies, just like our own, we were faced with this challenge of a go or no go decision on whether we're going to have our conference or not. And we ultimately decided not to do it and go virtual. But you can see the huge explosion that occurred in 2019, after 2019. And this 2021 will likely hit 1,000 published virtual conferences that that will show up on PubMed today. But in 2019, there were not a lot of guides to conduct this challenge of holding a virtual conference. It's something that scientists have never thought about in our group very much, and we wondered if we would be able to do it and do it well. So in our experience, we took the challenge and we learned a few things, which is what I'd like to share with you today. So learn from the T21RS experience. Today we're going to talk about go or no-go decisions in making your virtual conference, how to plan your virtual gathering, choosing platforms. This is very important to actually orchestrate the virtual venue. I want to talk about speaker timing, engagement of the audience, and also the power of the strength in your team. This is exceptionally important, and I'm going to really hone in on this. Also, in the end, I just want to talk about virtual wins that we gained from having this online virtual experience with our conference, and what the future of conferencing might hold. And before I get started, I'd like to thank Joe for selecting this entry for the 2021 Research Innovation Award. I'm much appreciated. So when you're making a decision on whether to go or not go with a virtual conference, you have to imagine what are the implications of canceling versus going virtual. You could just say, well, we're just going to not hold it and wait a year or two. So there are really key things to consider. You may already have a venue reservation. So if you already have a conference area reserved, you could lose money from that venue. We were able to actually get this referred for a slight cost to another year. However, lost conference cost recovery is a big issue. Every time we hold a virtual conference, we do get cost recovery from the proceeds of the participants. And that actually creates finances that can actually pay for the conference and also for other activities within the society. When you lose this conference, you may have finance issues, particularly if you lose your reservation money to your venue. Having a virtual conference, on the other hand, may help you to recover and recoup some costs to help you take care of venue reservation losses when you have a COVID pandemic or any other disruption that could occur. Also, it's important to note that collaboration is a major facet of having a conference, and face recognition is an extremely important index for the formation of social trust. This promotes collaboration. So we can't discount this lost asset if you choose to cancel. Face recognition in building collaboration is a very important issue. And it's, I think collectively, we have to imagine that if you don't have a conference and you just cancel, you diminish the innovation of the most recent ideas that have occurred. Thousands of new ideas get shared and exchanged at meetings. And at these meetings, they compete for recognition. And without that competition, you're unable to maximize innovation in the way that we're used to doing it. So if you choose to go virtual, which is what we opted to do, there are some highlights. You get to reduce the fees for all attendees. There's no traveling, no hotel costs, no food catering that needs to be paid for. Everybody has their own cup of coffee and snacks in their office. This all adds up to reduced costs for your attendees, which can create an attractive venue and pull to increase attendance. But it also allows you to invite individuals from countries that may not have ever been able to attend an in-person meeting. This is extremely important for T21RS and probably for most societies, because we want to have inclusion outside of the Western world in countries that don't normally attend. Also, virtual conferences are surprisingly easy to implement, but with caveats. There's no need to shuffle people around to podiums and in different rooms. Anyone who's ever been to a large conference knows that there's a tremendous amount of energy spent in just moving people traffic. Software platforms are actually easy to operate most of the time. Also, if you have a virtual meeting, this allows you to boost innovation and maintain your momentum. You get to retain idea exchange through the virtual venue, especially if you have new participants from other countries. And you get to keep your important members engaged with each other. This is really important. It's not the same as having an in-person meeting, but being engaged is part of winning the game to collaboration. So when you're planning a virtual conference, I have an important note. You must divide and conquer. You cannot do it alone, and there must be a team. You must define and develop your team early on, preferably at least 1 year before the conference is even to be held. Each team member needs to have a focused job so that they can dedicate their energy to performing it well. The T21 Research Society had several committees and teams and a lot of support. We had a virtual platform team. The virtual platform is what you're going to choose to help you deliver the content. And it needs to have individuals that are specialized at doing it very well. We had a communications team, which I'm part of. We advertise the meeting, we make social announcements, and we plan for summary formats. We have a program committee that is always needed, no matter if it's virtual or not, but the program committee needs to develop the research topics that will work well in a virtual conference setting. They select the exciting content, but they also, most importantly, need to prepare your speaker, just as Joe did for me today, to make the connection virtually, to do it seamlessly, and to be able to deliver in a select time frame. Like any conference, we still have an executive team that reviews and approves all team and committee budgets and requests. It's just now the flavor is virtual instead of doing in person. So the next thing you have to consider is which platform to choose. Since 2019, platforms have evolved tremendously. They were evolving in the middle of our group's decision process to choose. So we saw Zoom, for instance, grow from a tool that's good for just a few individuals in a room to a massive tool that can handle large events. Today, there are a good 50 or more event managers and tools that have been developed to handle the needs of a small to large conference. There are so many to choose from. We chose Events Air, but I'm in no way saying that Events Air is better than others. You have to balance your needs with the budget that you have available to operate the platform. They're not free. There are many price configurations, and you need to take time to evaluate each platform carefully to make sure it matches your needs and your budget constraint. So it's important to note, how do we choose a platform? So I recommend going to the awards and reviews websites that single out the highest performing and best rated technologies out there. I've listed 3 of them here. These are 3 big ones: the Event Technology Awards, Eventex, and the Video Awards. You get an added bonus. Not only do you get to see like how the different softwares work and what are their advantages and disadvantages, but you also get to learn a lot from pros. In these event spaces that where they give awards, they also feature many successful presentations and implementations of conferences. And you can learn a lot from about what enhances a meeting to have the best success from these award platforms. You can borrow from their ideas, which we did, to enhance your own society meeting. Also, it's very important to minimize barriers for your audience when you choose a platform. It's your job to decide how your platform is going to divide up the work that an audience participant needs to use to achieve connection to a specific session. So in one example, you could have a splash page, which is on the left, and then you may have a click, and then you have to have another click to get to yet another section. Be careful. The more steps that the audience participant needs to take to get to their content, the more likely they're going to get lost, frustrated, and probably miss important content that will actually make their overall experience less enjoyable. It's better to try a parallel design where you have a front page that has quick links that send a participant directly to their content in 1, possibly 2 steps. It's best to have everything as a singular step that's very straightforward so that you don't create artificial barriers just by organizing the software one way over another. So remember, simpler is best. Another important facet that one should consider with virtual conferences, this is very important. The maximum length of a virtual presentation should be 20 minutes or less. As we have a shorter attention span in a virtual setting than when we are in a large room full of people. And the reason for this is that virtual meetings lack the social cues we get when attending an in-person meeting. If I can't cue the feeling in the room from other people's faces, I actually am more prone to distraction and less likely to have memory retention from the message being delivered to me as a participant. So it's important to have 20 minutes or less. Some people even say 10 minutes. We actually chose 20 minutes, but definitely if you go beyond 20 minutes, it is actually a hindrance to the message itself. So it's important to have frequent breaks to help your audience focus so that everyone has time to get up and stretch, and more breaks than normal when you have a virtual meeting. This allows a participant to have that moment of relaxation so that they can enter the next message you intend to give them with a fresh start and have retention. Also, it's important at the end of a session, you may have live question and answer. Some platforms put all the individuals into or they have options where you can show all the individuals with multiple space panels, where you have lots of screens and you show this massive bulk of people participating. I would recommend to not have that set up. Choose to have very few human faces participating at any given moment to maximize the message. And this again goes back to the notion of face recognition. If you have fewer human faces, this helps the audience feel a communication authenticity, and they develop trust with what that individual, the speaker, is trying to portray in the message. And also, some program venues allow interactive polling features, which can be really helpful. Today, people will have a poll to judge, what they thought of this particular webinar. But there are methods to employ interactive polling right after a session, during the conference. So you can have multiple opportunities to learn from your audience. And this gives you a reason to publish audience poll follow-up to maintain communication with the individuals that came to your conference, which also is very important. So the T21 Research Society had a communications team. And in this team, we push social media notifications. If you decide to use social media notification to enhance the advertisement of your meeting, of your scientific meeting, you need to first develop a very clear strategy about what you want to commit to social media. So you need to build a social media campaign that pushes exact content at specific times when you want it to reach your audience. A year out, make your social media plans and build beautiful content to share, because if it's controlled, each social media outlet should be very similar to the other. Different folks, also dependent on age demographics, use different social media tools. So it's important to have a plan in your communications team to communicate as a society, not as an individual on social media. It's important to also consider that social media provides a particularly helpful opportunity to create attention for new scientists and student attendees. This is all part of society trying to bolster the next generation of researchers. And sometimes people have had Zoom fatigue, they call it, not to pick on Zoom, but they've had meeting fatigue. So virtual conferences should be fun and engaging. So imagine how to use unique entertainment. If you have entertainment as part of your social media experience and part of your virtual conference, you actually create better memory containment. So this is called in neuroscience or neuroeconomics salience tagging. And strong salient tags that are positive actually enhance the audience experience, and actually create better memory retention. In our conference, we had Indian children that had Down syndrome perform special dances to their favorite musical theme, and it was spectacular. You can see some of the snapshots that I took just from this webinar we were having. Also, this gives an opportunity for individuals in your society to do creative things that they don't normally do. And in our case, these children with Down syndrome felt like international superstars, and indeed they were. So think about unique entertainment. Get ideas from the events awards websites that actually award for engaging entertainment. And think about how you can use that to enhance your virtual conference and to help your audience remember it for a long time to come. And I cannot emphasize this in greater than you cannot do it alone. You must divide and conquer. T21RS had several committees and teams, and you must develop your team early on. Each team member needs a defined role, and that role needs to be specific. There can be no crossing over. If you have these defined roles and you have a lot in your team, you will have a successful virtual conference. It takes a lot of planning to create a virtual meeting. Anyone can do it if you work in a team. And in our case, you should expect to have a team with 10 or more, preferably 15 reliable go-getters that work together well. Also, finally, and from our virtual meeting, we had a number of successes. Some of them were spectacular and they actually changed the way we're going to hold meetings in the future. In this meeting, we had 91 abstracts submitted from 25 countries, which was a growth from our previous years. And we had 342 attendees, which was larger than normal. We expect to have more than that in the future. But we believe that this growth is partly because we had a venue that was cheap, it was fun and engaging and easy for anyone to join. We had 75% reduction in attendee costs, which also enhanced the number of folks that joined and improved attendance from new countries. And we had another success. By bringing all of these researchers together around the world, we were able to initiate a COVID-19 and Down syndrome survey, which is particularly needed in this population since they have an extremely high susceptibility to getting COVID-2 infection. Also, we had surprising results from social media pushing. Remember, we were advertising controlled content. We reached more individuals that gave us positive feedback than we had ever planned for. I give one instance. This was a young lady that has Down syndrome from Jordan. She was the first female, she tells us, to be awarded the title of Hero of Karate in my country, and the first individual with Down syndrome to get the black belt in her country, which is Jordan. Talk about positive feedback. This is just one particular communication success. We had many, many more. And also, when you use social media, this does give you the opportunity to look at your audience demographics in a more controlled way. This is an example from Facebook. We can see the number of women versus men and different age groups, and also from the countries that they represent that were participating with social media. Today, this number is at 8,500. It's growing steadily. It doesn't take a lot of controlled message content to generate enthusiasm out there in the world for what you're trying to do as a society. And you can use social media to share public, like we did. We shared our entertainment publicly so that individuals can see our recordings and our entertainment at later times. So what are the future of webinars? You know, of these virtual webinars, they're convenient. I think that the conferences and events are going to gain in popularity because there are so many platforms that are making it quite easy for individuals like us, scientists that have never performed a conference virtually before. I think session times are going to continue to converge to about 15 to 20 minutes, which is very different than like a plenary seminar you may get at a large conference venue. Things that work for large in-person conferences are not advisable at all times for virtual sessions. So there are also continued evolutions with interactivity. Some of the platforms have new tools that offer more opportunities to engage the audience on the fly during the event. You know, I talked about question and answer sessions, polls, surveys, there are group chats. But remember, it's very important to not create barriers by trying to introduce lots of complexity. Keep it simple, keep it entertaining, and your audience will have the best experience that is possible. T21RS plans to create hybrid conferences, in-person and or virtual meetings for our next meeting, which was going to be next year, if COVID-2 is less of a societal risk. If not, we're very happy to go virtual again. And I want to thank you for your attention. I talked about a few facets of having a virtual conference and things you need to consider. Consider this, in 1993, the world's first live stream event was actually a rock concert by this band named Severe Tire Damage. I'm not sure anyone's ever heard of this. I hadn't heard of it. It was actually no accident. The band members worked at Apple, Xerox, and digital equipment. And they actually knew they were prescient of the future to come. And I want to thank you for joining my webinar.
All right. Thank you, Eric, for sharing your insights and experiences. So let's have a look at some of the questions that our audience has been asking in the Q&A. If you do still want to ask your question, please use the Q&A section of your toolbox, and we'll get around to asking your questions. So my first question was, like, what did your team consider to be the biggest challenge for setting up this virtual conference? Like, did you struggle with anything in particular?
The very first thing we struggled with was choosing a platform. The platforms were evolving. So what we had in the very beginning of consideration was changing as we were trying to make decisions. Softwares were upgrading their abilities and their solutions. And keep in mind, like, webinars have been around since the 90s. There were already several platforms, but they weren't necessarily evolved and developed well enough to handle large conference venues. Some were, but there was such an explosion of platform possibilities happening during the mix that created more challenge. So that's one challenge. I think now that the COVID pandemic has created such a precedence for having virtual conferences, probably there may be a plateau effect. The market is saturated with these platforms now, and they're competing for dominance. So that's definitely one challenge. And then truly the biggest challenge is getting your team together and getting the roles defined. You will spend a lot of time controlling the message. Now, that actually is democratic, and it actually helps the virtual conference. The whole point of having the virtual conference is to disseminate the work, knowledge, and experience from individuals that you've selected to then curated to an audience. And it is a controlled message and should never lose sight of that. And so if you do proper planning to have control of the message, to communicate the greatest potential during that moment of time that individuals around the world have chosen to see your message, then you're going to have to spend a lot of time bringing it together and solidifying it into the perfect message nugget. And also, when you have a lot of people working together, they have to have defined roles so that they don't waste time thinking about some other problem related to a virtual conference that they don't need to worry about. This will create less feeling of being overworked, and it makes all your team members happy, and they're willing to do a virtual conference the next year if you ask them to do it. And I think those are the two main things to consider. The time that you need to spend is great. It's not hard, it's busy, and you need to start early.
All right. Thank you very much for that. We also had a question from our audience about what would it cost to have a virtual platform for if you want to organize a conference for, say, between 300 and 500 participants? Like, what would be an estimate of the budget you would need to have set aside for arranging your virtual platform?
I anticipated a question like this happening. I was like, oh my gosh, how am I going to answer this? Because you can, it depends on your setup. If you have a lot of individuals that are adept at using the platform tools, in our case, we got help from one of the universities that is associated with the researchers in our group. This was the University of California at Irvine. They have a number of public venue experts that are used to doing these types of things. We utilize that help. You could do that as well. However, if you've been to a large conference, say, you may spend many thousands of dollars to have a number of individuals at that venue to control the message, to make sure that people can navigate and to handle server movements within the platform. The actual cost, and for me, I would expect if you choose to go very simply, it could actually be, under 5,000, but you may spend quite a bit more depending on the complexity and the number of engagements that are needed from the platform company to help you implement your meeting. It's highly variable. And so I say if you're a young society like ours, you have limited finances, and in a COVID pandemic, you may have already reserved a venue. If you're lucky, your venue host will allow you to delay the cost to another year and help you. If you're not lucky, you're stuck with the cost of losing, not being able to have a meeting and the loss of that down payment that you made. And so in those cases, you may have limited finances. And I think having the simplest interface actually is more powerful than having a whole lot of bells and whistles with lots of rooms and lots of interactive this and that. If you create a lot of complexity, that actually creates barriers for your audience. When they show up from their busy work moment to come to your conference, you need to have them easily piped. Now, I'm bringing this up to the content. I'm bringing this up because the more complexity you have, the more cost that's associated with running a venue like that, and you want to control that. So to keep the cost down, keep it simple, and your audience will love you for it. I wish I could give you exact cost, but it's very dependent on which platform you use, whether you choose to have individuals at that platform agency to help you during the event, and how much you're willing to do on your own.
All right. Thank you very much.
Sorry,
So,
that's kind of nondescript, but it's difficult to answer.
but yeah, it is difficult, but at least there is an estimate there. So would you say that it takes more effort to organize a virtual conference versus a traditional in-person conference?
No, I think it takes less effort,
Okay.
but it takes more effort. It takes like you imagine if you have when you reserve a venue, you need to have signage, you need to think about people movement. You have to make sure everyone knows where to go at different times and that meetings don't go over this and that. It's like, you've got a lot of people spread out over a large surface area. Where in the virtual conference, you have none of that. And you actually have the control built into the platform that is being managed by a select few that are helping keep the meeting going. So that actually makes it easier. I think the harder part, and this may become easier as we go through time, is making sure and investing the time to have a pre-game meeting with your speakers and with the folks that are providing entertainment for your conference, if you choose to have entertainment, making sure that they can connect seamlessly so that the experience for your audience comes off perfectly. That takes time, and then it's worth investing time into it. So there's more work on that end point of having a virtual conference.
Right. And so our next question is, how do you cope with intellectual property issues or GDPR issues? And do you recommend live only over pre-recorded presentations? And also, were the participants of your conferences willing to post and share recordings of their talks or post their PDFs online?
That's a great question. So to put it in perspective, you have to ensure that you don't copyright infringe. And that is particularly important with entertainment. Suppose your individuals choose to use songs that they love, media that is actually, has copyright infringement clauses that's protected by law. And then that may, or something like that may show up while you're recording your session that can cause you jeopardy as a society. You don't want to promote that type of, you don't want to share that type of, danger or risk to the side of it just by copyright infringement. So it's probably, you pre-record a session and you want to, collect everything you can for the audience to be able to look at later, which is another powerful benefit of the virtual conference. But then you're going to need to have your team come back and prove what was recorded and consider you have to act on good faith, but you could copyright infringe without even knowing it. And so I think that it's wise to prove everything that you're going to release as a society after the conference. It's a good question, because if someone has a message that also carries with it content that shouldn't have been carried, that's been released publicly, and that was the individual's choice that was giving that talk. But as a society, you have to make a choice at what you will allow to be administered further. And then that falls in the society's venue. And so that's why you have to prove that. A society could choose not to release some conference materials just to be absolutely safe. Trisomy 21 chose to release conference materials within the participants only at first. For the public entertainment that we provided, it was so good and so inspiring. If anyone wants to see it, let me know. It's really good. I'd love to share it with you. But we decided to release that after we reviewed the social media copyright infringement clauses. And I highly advise individuals to do that before you release something. If it has music or clips of music, there's a huge gray area when you interpret, have I done something new with a musical piece that makes it artistic? And sometimes that that can be interpreted as copyright infringement, or it could be interpreted as we created something new and useful with a new purpose. And so you have to weigh those clauses out and consider what's too much risk for your society to share versus what's the goal of society to create salient tags, to create good experiences for people. You want them to join your society, and you want them to enjoy being a part of it. So it's a balancing act, definitely. A lawyer may speak to you very differently, but I'm one to take a little more risk if it creates a better experience from an end user, as long as we can interpret that we're not, inadvertently having copyright infringement.
Yeah, that's always better, safe to check first.
Yeah,
So,
check first. A lawyer may tell you, "Oh, no way, you don't. That's too much risk." But a society, from my perspective, I think it's wise to consider the artistic beauty of art and what you're trying to do, as a society.
yeah. All right, thank you. And finally, do you have any advice for coping with participants who might not have adequate English speaking skills and still want to attend a conference?
That's a great question. And for our society, we often take we have from the most recent meeting, we have the COVID Down syndrome initiative. And so we make effort to translate many of the materials that we want to have in initiatives and things that we need to communicate into other languages. From social media, I had to hunt people that have various language proficiencies, because I don't know Arabic and I don't know some of the other languages. So I had to find people to help me translate and then see if we could translate back. Google Translate sometimes fails. It's good, but it's not, like having a real translator. It would be nice, say we're presenting a conference in English, but if you wanted to really reach out to Brazil, it would be great to somehow have Portuguese captioning that's been translated for your venue. It may be spoken in English because we can't speak 10 languages at once. And we also don't have the time to have 10 conferences in 10 different languages. So one could consider, well, at least with some of the software platforms, that if you have voice recognition, you can also have voice translation. And so that takes even more time. But if you really want to reach out to South America, or perhaps you want to have Mandarin Chinese or some other language that you think, oh, I'd really like these individuals to be able to see what we're trying to communicate, then you could consider translation services. That's going to cost more, which may be not a problem. I think for T21, we restrict translation services. We did not use translation services in our conference, but we do use them for very specific content to ensure that we can reach other languages in other countries. It's all a matter of cost. You can do anything if you have the budget.
That is definitely true. All right, thank you so much for taking the time to answer all the questions today. So I think this was the final question. If anyone has any last minute questions, do put them in the Q&A. If not, I would like to thank you very much, Eric, for joining us today. Just a reminder, everyone, the recording of this session will be made available to you via email. We also have one final session coming up. It's called Live Streaming the Unseen, How to Use Real-Time Video Streaming in the Lab. This takes place on Thursday, October the 14th at 11 a.m. Eastern Time or 5 p.m. Central European Time. So do be sure to sign up for more insights on that topic. So thanks everyone for joining us, and have a wonderful rest of your day.
Thank you. Thank you very much.